going to have an issue controlling AI is when it becomes sentient. When robots start walking around us and doing whatever they're doing and we can't do anything to stop it. How do you stop a 1,000-pound machine? I think it's critical about who gets involved with AI, the types of influence that gets involved with certain products or companies, and who's in control of those things. Now we're putting AI systems into robots, and we're depending on these machines, and they're operating in our presence, and they potentially physically endanger us.
Welcome to the show, Paul.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here.
So you have transitioned from the US Marine Corps to venture capital. How did that influence how you evaluate risk and discipline in AI startups overall?
In terms of evaluating risk, I look at everything in my corporate career and my world of business is a potential risk. The business that I'm in is a VC, is all about reducing risk, right, on deals that we decide to get involved in. So, conducting in military terms, conducting a sort of reconnaissance, so to speak. But in VC terms, it would be more like conducting a sort of due diligence,
yeah.
both preemptive, present, from a future standpoint, conducting ongoing diligence. So that is a lot of what my job consists of, and nothing goes as planned in venture capital. It is a very volatile industry to work in, right? It's an industry that's built largely on hypothetical projections that stakeholders have calculated out, but there's so many things that we can't see in terms of market conditions, black swan events, market tailwinds, et cetera, that we just cannot predict, right? And so, people are involved. We also can't predict how people are, going to kind of embrace the companies that we invest in, right? And so, with that being said, again, nothing in venture capital goes as planned. And so the military is very much the same. And coming from the Marine Corps, we have a saying called adapt and overcome. We deal with ambiguous situations where resources may be limited, outcomes may be in terms of, what could happen. Outcomes may be what I would call hard to, unpredictable, so to speak. And so you kind of have to navigate around the unknown and the ambiguous with what you have today, And so, I think one of the challenges that has plagued the VC industry for a long time is the focus and the current mindset, of the VC industry is largely built on what's going to happen in the future and what we could possibly be. But I don't think the industry does too good of a job at focusing on what we're doing now, what we could do better, and what we're not doing so well. So that's kind of the approach that I bring to the industry and my work as a VC.
All right. Yeah. So the government regulations are coming on AI, right? Because AI is evolving so fast, the regulations are trying to catch up. Would you agree with that statement?
I do, and I don't think that regulations are, with the current approach, I don't think they're ever going to catch up. How do you catch something that's moving much faster than you are? There's so much complexity and interpretation of AI, right? From one government to the next, from one organization to the next. How do you regulate that, right? In order to regulate something, you have to be able to reduce the complexity of it. And if you can't reduce the complexity of it and make it standard, then you're never going to be able to regulate it. So with that being said, I always use kind of an example of vehicles. You can think of the highway system in the United States of America or other countries is a sort of automation framework, right? And there's only so many possible scenarios that can happen when you're driving a car pulls out in front of you, right? And a deer hops out in front of you, or in your case, you're in Australia, so a kangaroo. So there's only so many different types of scenarios that can happen, right? Inclement weather, so on. The potential cases there are finite, not infinite. Whereas, with AI, we have an infinite amount of cases, right? And so, with that being said, AI would be a next level criticality in terms of um, how we should regulate, right? So by that I mean, going back to my highway system analogy, when is cars have evolved, as vehicles have evolved, we've created a framework around that, right? A standardization. But we can only regulate vehicles so much, right? Because we realize it's not the vehicles that are the problem, it's the people that are driving them. So a car does not become a car until someone is behind the wheel, right? And so even though, say, for example, here in America, 20, 30 years ago, a 700 horsepower car would not have been street legal, but today it is. And why can we release 200-mile-an-hour capable cars onto the roads? Because we regulate the users, we regulate the drivers, because we understand that a car does not become a car, no matter how powerful it is, until we regulate the users. And so, taking that analogy, we're really looking at AI in the same. I'm looking at AI in the same context, right? We need to regulate the users. We can't regulate the heck out of this thing from an organizational standpoint. The things that people are doing with AI at a user level of utility, some of it's good and some of it's unspeakable, So, with that being said, in terms of the government getting involved, I've long said that there needs to be a social security, kind of like the America social security system, but every person should have should have some sort of identifier code, that tracks back to them. Like, in other words, we need a policing force, an AI policing force, to police how it's being used. And, there needs to be some sort of blockchain or a unique identifier code that when a product gets used, or, that needs to be able to get traced back to that user, right? So that we're building a law system, a legal framework around AI. Now, that may sound crazy to some that are listening to this podcast, but would you prefer that, the cybersecurity incidents and, the threats that are ensuing because of increased AI capability, would you prefer for that to continue? Would you prefer for fake information to continue to persist when you don't even know what you believe anymore, because you have to double check it 5 times? And there's a ripple effect to this, to where, it goes from not necessarily harmless from a physical standpoint to we're putting AI systems into robots and cars, and we're depending on these machines, and they're operating in our presence, and they potentially physically endanger us. That is the track that we're headed down if we don't get a handle on government policy at the consumer level.
So when you say having a unique ID, are you talking about having a unique ID for AI, individual AIs as well? Like, is that like with the growth of AI? I mean, there are personified AIs more and more now. Are we talking about something like that? Because people like Yuval Noah Harari are talking about AI personhood. Are you going in that direction, or more of like, okay, no, you have to keep people accountable?
Yeah, I think it's largely about keeping people accountable, but you can take, for example, like the credit system. Like here in America, we have the 3-tier credit system, and you can implement that or replicate that into, so to speak, a policing system, not a credit system, but a policing system for AI. You could build it into a credit system if you want. It says, hey, if you misuse AI, if you misappropriate AI, then you have like an AI credit that reduces your access in some ways or not, right? The other thing is that not everyone needs access to AI, not at the level that we have it now. No. AI belongs in certain compartments within society for specific cases. How can you have a system that is rule based or machine learning based and just release it like out into the wild, out into general society? I mean, that doesn't. How do you control that? Well, we can't. It's not meant to be released into every compartment of society. So, what we have is we have organizations that are, we talk about data privacy, but there's never really any, that's a facade. There's never really any data privacy. We have organizations that have created rules to make us feel comfortable around, data privacy and security. But that is really to just control their share of the market so that data can't get replicated, right? It's not to protect the consumer.
I think it's very refreshing to hear from a entrepreneur VC about that those safety concerns around AI that you just mentioned. I think the question is, do you think it's possible to have any control over that, and AI tools not going wide? Like, it's going to increase because there's arms race, right, for the best AI right now, and all the private companies, they want the highest value, so they want to give people the best AI they have and build the hype up, so get the valuation up. So with all of those incentives in place, do you think it's possible? Is there a way forward to do that?
Do I think it's possible to fix this?
Yeah, to control it, because the incentives are to give my AI. So if I build a good AI, I want to give it to everyone. And then after I release it, I have no control over what people do with it, right? So, yeah. So, but I have incentive to do that because then my valuations go up and I get more money. Do you think it's possible to control AI in any way, the spread of AI?
I don't think it's totally possible to control AI. We're not talking about something that, is, we're trying to make it self-operate, but we're not talking about something that's sentient yet.
Yep.
There's no way, in my opinion, to control AI directly. I should rephrase that. Okay, no way to control it directly. Right now, we can control ourselves. And I don't think there ever will be a way to really control AI. We're not talking about something that is sentient or that makes decisions. It just sits there. How do you control something that doesn't do anything unless you put a human behind it? Where we're going to have an issue controlling AI, we don't have an issue controlling AI right now. We have an issue controlling ourselves. Where we're going to have an issue controlling AI is when it becomes sentient, when robots start walking around us and doing whatever they're doing, and we can't do anything to stop it.
Yeah,
how do you stop
a
1,000-pound? Yeah, how do you stop a 1,000-pound machine, right? So I think that's one thing. I do believe that when we build things in society, we do lose control over them. We lose that interior locus of control, kind of gets bigger and bigger, right? And so I think it's critical about who gets involved with AI, the types of influence that gets involved with certain products or companies, and what the motives are, right? And who's in control of those things. Because I think everyone, generally speaking, they try to build products with good intent, and then you get the wrong people with the wrong motivations involved, in those companies. Then it kind of goes sideways, right? And we lose track of the original mission, which was to do something good, to do something that would improve the world and help us live easier lives, et cetera, et cetera. So, I don't think it's really possible to control AI. When we say things like that, I think we're looking at it from the wrong side of the window, the wrong side of the glass. So that the answer is really ourselves. Can we control ourselves and how we use it, and respect that, and respect that it's not our toy. It can do a lot of good, but it can do a lot of harm. The other thing is AI is important. We do need it. We do. Otherwise I wouldn't be an AI venture capitalist. I wouldn't be trying to bring AI products into the world. But just because I'm an AI venture capitalist doesn't mean that I'm not critical of AI in the industry. I have to be smart about this. So I will say we need it. We need to democratize it so we can get access and give access to people, um, not just in America, but in other countries of the world, that can move their infrastructure and countries forward. But it's a two-edged sword, because in order to democratize, we have to commercialize. You can't democratize it without commercializing it, and commercializing it is expensive, right? I mean, companies have to make money in order to build it at scale. So, you have a lot of companies that are at all costs trying to build and commercialize these products, right? But democratization and commercialization has two separate motivations. Democratization, why? Because I want to give it to the world, because it will help people. It will help people out. It will advance us. Commercialization, so I can make money. So it can't be one or the other. There needs to be a balance between those two.
Such a lovely quote. Like democratization requires commercialization, because when you say you're democratizing something, even like one of my startups, Moat AI, we were like democratizing marketing technology, and it is such a nice thing to say when you are democratizing something. But the moment you say you are
Yeah,
commercializing something, that's not a really nice thing to say. But yeah, you can't do one without the other. That's a very good point.
I call it demercialization. It's a
Right.
combination of the two.
Right.
It's demercialization, essentially, is what we're trying to do.
So with that worldview on, like, AI is required, but we have to be critical about AI. How do you go about evaluating a new AI startup? What are your parameters there?
Purely in the AI context, I would look at things like, okay, how is the product built? Like, are they seeing their AI? So again, is the product rule based or machine learning based? What are the what is their data structure, right? Like, so do they have certain processes in terms of how data gets created and shared, and is that scalable? Is it protectable? Um, for example, like, if a startup is learning off of user data, like, so the machine learning and the machine learning model is learning off of user data, that's great, but you can't steal that user data, right? So there's a process called federated learning, which allows the end client to retain their own data, right? But it essentially learns in a closed ecosystem, right? In a closed room. The company that is training their machine learning model on that data doesn't retain any data, right? And so I think that's one way to maybe look at how a company might be protecting their data. What's the governance, depending on where you're building, what you're building. Like, if you're building in the cybersecurity space, there's all sorts of compliance that needs to be looked at. Is it NIST compliant, et cetera? How does it meet GDPR standards, et cetera? But if you're building AI at all, I think cybersecurity is always going to be a part of it. So that's one aspect, kind of looking at those things. So how autonomous is the product, so to speak? Like, is it built on top of a large language model, or is it a proprietary language model that the company has built themselves? And then what are the maintenance costs? What are the breakpoints, the failure points for that? You have to look at those things in terms of how scalable it is. For example, if a company is using AWS versus another infrastructure, AWS has kind of been the holy grail, but we also have to make sure that AWS is pretty expensive. So we also need to make sure that it's going to be scalable, and that the infrastructure can support and build. AWS can pretty much support anything, but there are some systems, infrastructure platforms out there like AWS that just won't support the scale.
When it comes to the AI model development like done by a startup or a company, I think values like transparency, explainability, those kind of things comes into the picture more and more. Is that something you would focus on a startup at the early stage, or is it something that once you start scaling, you can focus on and develop?
Yeah, at my stage and where I focus with earlier stage companies, I tend to focus more on the people and the market opportunity versus the product itself. Those things are much more important to me. Uh, I think you can take a satisfactory product, right? And but if it solves one need, like it might not be the sexiest product out there. From a feature standpoint, it may be fairly plain, and that's okay because we don't need fancy. Actually, complexity kills startups. So we just need a product that solves the customer need in a really good way. You know, so I don't focus as much on the product per se. It's more about the market opportunity and the people behind it. I will give you a good example. McDonald's is a prime example. The world loves McDonald's. It's one of the most recognized brands, but we know it's not good for you. Everyone knows that. But so I would, in terms of food, I would say that is, it's not a top tier product. It's a satisfactory product in terms of food, but they're not. McDonald's is not in the food business. They're in the convenience business, and that's what they sell. So you got to know what you're selling, not what you're building necessarily, but you got to understand what your market is. McDonald's, again, I'll repeat that. McDonald's does not sell food in the way that like a typical restaurant would. That's not what they're marketing. They're marketing convenience and they're marketing aesthetics. They're a marketing company / convenience company, and they're really good with aesthetics and emotional hooks, and convenience.
Right. That's a very interesting point. So I think you answered my next question as well. I was going to ask you what your advice is going to be to a new startup founder, like in the AI domain, any domain. Should they be focusing on AI safety and ethics from day one? Maybe the answer is, and I'll tell you the answer, and you can tell me if I'm wrong. All right. Maybe the answer is should focus on solving a problem first, getting the first client first, and then you can worry about the rest. What do you think about that answer?
I don't think you're wrong. I don't necessarily think there's any right way to do it, but ethics are always going to be different, right? So I do believe that you should think about the type of product that you're building first. I would have to agree with you that you should think about the product and how viable, feasible it is, timely and relevant. It's got to be that. If you don't know the field that you're operating on, then you can't build in ethics on top of that, right? Like, so we kind of have to know what we're working with, but of course have like a base set of principles and values, and to know like, okay, like we don't want to hurt people, we don't want to damage the environment. Like you can have those base things, and then you think about the product, and as the product evolves, you can look at certain aspects that, again, that resort back to the base set of values. Like, are we hurting people? Are we helping people? What is the collateral damage, etc. And that's another question to ask, is like, how much collateral damage is acceptable? Because everything that we invent causes another problem. Like if we didn't have planes, we wouldn't have plane crashes, but how much of that is acceptable? Planes don't crash often, but when they do, they make the global news. The FAA has gone through insurmountable efforts to really investigate why planes crash, what happened. Was it pilot error? Was it mechanical error? Was it weather based, etc. So they look at all these things. They do these investigations. There's some FAA investigations after planes crash that take years, like 2 or 3 years of daily investigating. But again, that's something to think about, is no product is going to be perfect, and there will be collateral damage. As leaders, we have to decide how much collateral damage is acceptable. Because thinking that, well, zero collateral damage is going to happen, like, is you're living in a dream world at that point.
Yeah, I think I've seen so much in social media, like everyone bashing social media itself and any new invention, because you can find negatives in anything, right? Like even AI and some, like, I mean, they are not wrong, but then as you said, what is acceptable level of cultural damage? Like even every question you ask in ChatGPT consume a certain amount of water, certain amount of resources, or from the grid. But yeah, it's always about comparing the benefits and the cultural damage. So looking 5 years ahead, right? Because you are very close to the startups and the innovation. What kind of AI innovations excite you the most? And then from the other side, which ones concern you the most from a safety perspective?
The ones that are really exciting to me are, quite frankly, I'm a contrarian, so it would be the ones that a lot of people don't talk about, right? A lot of the technologies that get talked about are consumer facing. They're consumer facing, either B2B or B2C. The ones that really excite me are the ones that we don't think about, right? Like, so for example, like everything that we use in society, we don't think about for the most part, right? Like, so when you're driving down the road, and you're at a stoplight in heavy traffic, you think about the flow of traffic and why no accidents happen. That is an orchestrated symphony. Think about all the engineering and everything behind the scenes that had to make that network possible. You know, think about, you can download any airplane app and see all the flights that are going on in the world at any given point in time. Thousands, thousands. It looks like ants on a screen. But think about all the logistics, between all the airports in the world and hundreds of thousands of flights taking off daily. Think about everything behind the scenes that has to make that possible that we don't think about. So with AI, I'm very interested in the things that we don't think about, the picks and the shovels, so to speak, and technologies or product systems that are being built that can, make AI more efficient, right? Reduce the strain on the environment, the hard labor that goes into the mining locations and sites. There are people get paid 10 cents on a dollar, making that better. It's a sweatshop factor, right? Like, so, making that better, where AI is at the foundation, at the very foundation where it is, being improved upon. I feel like we're just kind of putting lipstick on a pig with a lot of things that we're doing with AI, but the pig is sick, so we need to tend to that, and those are the types of things that interest me, get me excited. Humans have a tendency to jump on and follow the crowd, and just whatever is the new trend, right? But that's not me. And I believe the real money to be made, and the real impact to be made, especially in the earlier stages, is on those things that everyone's not necessarily talking about.
What you said kind of reminded me of this.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a philosophical thing. It's like nobody knows how to make a pencil. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah. Yeah.
So when you get a pencil, you have wood, you have paint, and you have lead. And if you just take the lead part, um, and the people who cut wood don't know how to mine for lead, and people who mine for lead don't know how to make those machines, and people who make those machines don't know how to create electricity that they need to create those machines. And it's a so much like complicated web of people, like a symphony, as you said, making sure that the world we live in is currently possible. And yeah, so nobody understands how it all works, but it works. So one of the things about AI is like when AI, let's say AI takes over at some point, we get AGI, and I think that fact that human symphony works in this way, could it work against us? Because we don't know how everything works. Like I have a specialty, you have a specialty, but everything else around us works. When we open the tap, the water flows. when we flip on the switch, electricity comes. We have no idea how some of these things work and who all the logistics that you mentioned. When if AI takes over, if that is a possibility you're worried about or you're thinking about, it's kind of scary because we can't understand the whole symphony. But AI might be able to and manipulate us.
I think we're already being manipulated by AI. I think we're already being manipulated, and it's just gonna, it's just gonna exacerbate into something bigger. Eventually, the more we try to automate AI, AI is not perfect. It is man made. So AI is doomed to make mistakes at some point. Right? It is doomed to malfunction. I don't care how many protocols and rule based logic or algorithms you put into it. Eventually those rules become irrelevant to the current societal infrastructure. Or those rules become irrelevant, or the algorithms do. It's kind of like in the 1980s, if you're familiar with software systems. Everyone was using COBOL, and I know companies that stayed on COBOL because it was too expensive to completely reinstall their infrastructure off the mainframe computers, right? But then, like, they had no choice. When the late 2000s came around, companies had to move, right? And so they're moving on to more updated, programming languages and systems, Java, C#. We had an explosion of software languages that happened in the early 2000s. And quite frankly, that's probably a lot of the reason why we have some of the technologies that we do today. But with regards to COBOL being outdated, they kind of caused the strife on themselves. They put the strife on themselves. They cause their own trials and tribulations. But you can say, for example, with AI, it's very similar to that COBOL scenario. See, these organizations were forced to make a change because they were becoming irrelevant. You know what I mean? Their systems were no longer timely. They were becoming irrelevant with the current business infrastructure. And so when you become irrelevant, you have to make a change, because then you can't keep up. Your infrastructure can't keep up. And that causes a problem, where they implode from the inside, right? So AI is very similar, where, some of these things will become outdated and it will implode from the inside. And when it implodes from the inside, at that point, us humans have a problem, And so that is, see, we're talking about COBOL, but then I'm talking about AI at the same time, right? And so the thing is that we're not just talking about one company that was using COBOL. We're talking about our entire globe that is using AI. And what happens when the entire globe runs on AI? How do you migrate something like that, right? When something becomes outdated at a global scale, how do you migrate something like that? You don't, and you don't do it in time. I don't see how we can do that in time. AI is a very global technology, so that is something that we should think about. It will certainly become, and it does get things wrong. ChatGPT gets things wrong all the time. And so what's the recourse? You can only have so many engineers in the world. There's only so many engineers in the world that are building AI systems, but the whole world is using AI, right? So there's a lot more people using AI than that are building it. So, how is that scalable, right? Don't you think you should maybe have more engineers than there are, people that are using it? I just think the oversight metrics are a little bit skewed.
I have two more questions, slightly different. One is about AI agents. So, because like LLMs came to the picture and everyone got excited because LLM added real value. You can just go to a chatbot and get value immediately, right? Everyone got it. And then I think connecting to the previous point you mentioned that people using COBOL, you have to adapt and you have to change. And the executives are having this problem of this new AI comes like so fast. You can't adapt, right? But when AI agents was something special because everyone talked about how that is going to be the future, or maybe that is the future. I have invitation to do like a guest lecture on agentic AI. So I would love to hear your perspective on, do you think AI agents are the future, or do you think it's just a hype?
In their current state, no, I don't believe they're the long-standing future. I think they're a temporary thing. I think they're a subliminal pass-through. I think they're essentially a test phase of the market. Kind of like how iPods were before iPhones came out, right? Say, for example, iPods didn't last very long, maybe 5 years. But then people realize, oh, we can actually instead of having this iPod, we can just put the music on the phone. And so I think that's kind of where we're at, and I believe there's going to be a migration from agent to some sort of next level, right? Like, so agents in their current format, I don't believe that is going to exist for long. I think there's too many things happening from, computer chip brain interfaces, to, robots evolving, et cetera. So I think that's kind of, I believe that's where we're headed. And again, on my previous comment, before you asked this question, I wanted to also add, I said, I think we need more engineers in the world than people using AI. And, we do. But the thing is, that's not possible, right? I don't think we can have more engineers than people using AI. So what do? We have to create self-policing strategies. We have to create an education system globally and an indoctrination system around how AI is used, right? So that we know, when an AI is not doing what it's supposed to do, then there has to be a backtrack protocol there, right? Because otherwise it'll just get out of hand, right? And so there has to be some sort of troubleshooting and remediation process in terms of how it's being used when the system goes rogue. And there needs to be some sort of utility that companies give to almost kind of like open source utility. There needs to be some sort of utility that companies give to users to be able to have the power to downgrade the system, right? And it you can call it a kill switch or whatever, but there needs to be some sort of utility where users can go in with ease and reprogram the system. So these things shouldn't just come off the shelf reprogram. Like, they should have some sort of off the shelf, ABC, very simplistic way of like, hey, you can reprogram this AI to function differently if it is not with confines, so to speak, right? Like, we don't want every consumer, reprogramming systems to, do really crazy stuff, but there should be some sort of alternative functionality that the users can implement.
Yeah, I think I've been talking to my team about this as well. It's a very interesting point you brought up there, because I think maybe the future of software is not like right now. If you purchase an off the shelf software, there's only limited amount of configuration that you could do. I think the main thing LLMs introduced was natural language computing. The computers now understand what you're saying in English. So now you can purchase a piece of software and maybe tell the software, this is how I want you to behave. And of course, inside a set parameters, that software might be able to adjust itself. So I'm thinking of like a very flexible software. So right now you have to go to settings of a software and change configurations. But what if you can just tell the software, just do these things because that's how my environment works, right? So part of that could be that off switch as well. But I mean, the thing is, like, all of this is possible until it becomes sentient.
Exactly. Yep.
If it becomes sentient, right? After that, it's going to be tough. Your point on AI agents, where AI agents would be the like precursor to something better, like iPod to the iPhone. That's how I kind of think about it as well. Because I think for the last 3-4 decades, humans put so much information on the internet, like everything is now in the internet, and then the LLMs came and learned from everything, like all of the human knowledge. And then the AI agents came in, and now we use like things like MCP protocols and all of that to connect all of the tools to those LLMs. That's what we do, right? AI agents is basically LLMs connected to the environment around them. So now we have given AI all of the knowledge of humanity, and now we are giving them access to all of the tools. I mean, what could go wrong? But I
Right?
think only time will tell there.
We would need another podcast to discuss that one.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. So this is on venture capital. So obviously USA is the like innovation capital of the world, but I think there's a lot of startups now coming from Australia, and I'm originally from Sri Lanka, and Sri Lanka is kind of having its Singapore moment. There's so much startups are now popping up in Sri Lanka, and Sri Lanka as a country policy, looking for venture capital to like set up shop there as well. What do you think is the appetite in maybe Silicon Valley or USA in general, or VCs, to like expand their reach and go to this developed world and developing world, like outside of America? Do you think there's appetite?
I think there's always been appetite. As a matter of fact, I think it's over half of all unicorn founders in the US are actually not even from the US. Yeah. So either way, the whatever the statistics are, there's a huge portion of unicorn founders that are not from the US. So I think there's always an appetite for founders to come in to the U.S. market, and the infrastructure is set up in a way that facilitates that. We have strong policies in this country, and this country has always been built on bringing immigration and welcoming people in, and bringing new technologies and or immigration via new technologies and so forth. But yeah, the U.S. definitely still has a lot of resources there, and I think that's why even up in Canada, I was up in Canada last year, and I've seen a lot of founders up in Canada are just trying to get to the U.S. market, and I've seen that especially in Canada, a little bit in Latin America, South America, and I think there's probably more hesitance with earlier stage founders in like the UK market, but Europe, I definitely see probably more interest in the US market with the earlier stage founders. But Europe, especially in the Ukraine, and probably like Germany, places like that. But even in Europe, there's pretty good exposure, in terms of like Germany has a really bustling tech scene. And then I've seen quite a few founders in places like Italy and France, in terms of Europe. But I've seen them since like more hesitancy with founders like kind of who are based in the UK and kind of Ireland, that part of the world. But I get some that have approached me, some that I've dealt with.
Thanks, Paul. I think that was a great conversation. Really appreciate your time. I know you're a busy man. Thank you. We'll talk soon.
I really enjoyed it.